For centuries, the Christian confession of resurrection has been mentally tied to a highly specific biological picture. The assumption is that a dead, decaying body reversed course. A stopped heart began to beat again, and dead cells suddenly fired back to life. Because of that medical framing, modern intellectuals are often forced into a corner. You either quietly suppress scientific rationality or dismiss the entire event as an ancient myth. But a closer reading of the primary sources reveals a surprising problem with that biological model. It directly contradicts the biblical text itself. In 1 Corinthians, Paul rebukes those asking how the dead are raised. He calls the questioner foolish for assuming the planted material returns. He draws a hard line. Flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. Across all the accounts, the original texts avoid describing the final resurrection as a simple reanimation of a corpse. Engaging with the actual claims of the text requires moving past the biological model. The authors describe a profound shift in the subject's mode of existence. Look at the gospel appearance narratives not as theological poetry, but as observational data. The writers are documenting specific physical phenomena. The accounts describe an entity breaking standard material laws. Jesus passes through solid locked doors. Friends fail to recognize him. He sits down, then vanishes instantly. The writers understood the difference between a revived corpse and this new event. They provided a control group, Lazarus. When raised, Lazarus used doors and eventually died again. None of those constraints applied to Jesus. The datasets are incompatible. If these authors simply wanted to fabricate a story about a resurrected corpse, they would have written another Lazarus story. But including these physics-breaking anomalies suggests they were recording something they didn't fully understand. What they describe is a third state of being, a physical reality operating outside standard three-dimensional limits, distinct from a reanimated shell or an immaterial ghost. The data they recorded demands a structural framework that biology cannot provide. To understand it, we must turn to physics. Paul addressed the mechanics of this process by relying on the analogy of a seed. When planted, it doesn't just grow larger, it dismantles its current physical structure to emerge as an entirely new plant. This creates a paradox. The essence is preserved, it is the same organism, but the physical form and its capabilities have been completely replaced. Paul gives this transformed state a specific name in Greek, soma pneumatikon, which translates to the spiritual body. This theological concept has a precise modern physics equivalent, a phase transition. You see this with water. H2O exists as rigid ice, fluid liquid, or atmospheric gas. The essential identity remains identical. That specific molecule never changes its nature, but as it shifts states, its physical laws and degrees of freedom upgrade. In this phase transition model, resurrection is exactly the passage of a preserved identity into a higher, unconstrained mode of existence. It moves beyond the reassembly of old, decaying parts and introduces a completely new set of physical laws. But this still leaves a mechanical question. Even with a transformed body, how does a physical entity pass through a solid, locked door? To answer that, we turn to the geometric framework of spacetime developed by Hermann Minkowski and Albert Einstein, known as the block universe. In this model, past, present, and future exist simultaneously as a single four-dimensional block. Because we are three-dimensional beings, we only experience this reality in isolated slices, which we perceive as the flow of time. Think about how an object from a higher dimension interacts with a lower dimensional world. Consider a 3D sphere passing through a flat 2D plane. To a 2D observer, the sphere appears as a dot out of nowhere. It grows into a circle, then vanishes entirely, bypassing all 2D boundaries. Map that geometric behavior onto the reports of the locked upper room and the road to Emmaus. These anomalies represent the precise geometric footprints of a higher dimensional reality intersecting with our own. What look like miracles are simply the predictable consequences of a four-dimensional entity projecting itself into three-dimensional space. This four-dimensional model provides a logical basis for redefining other core doctrines, beginning with the ascension. The traditional view often treats the ascension as a vertical liftoff, a physical body traveling to a fixed point in the sky. But quantum entanglement demonstrates that at the deepest levels of reality, spatial distance does not create absolute separation. Two particles can remain instantly connected, regardless of the space between them. Applying this to the ascension allows us to bridge the gap between 4D geometry and the concept of universal presence. In a four-dimensional block universe, all coordinates form one singular structure. The ascension represents a phase transition into absolute omnipresence. By transitioning into this higher state, Christ moved from a single three-dimensional coordinate to being present throughout the entire block. This establishes sitting at the right hand of God as a state of universal authority and presence, rather than a literal chair in the sky. This redefines the parousia, or the second coming. In Greek, parousia refers to the visible disclosure of a king who is already present. Rather than an external invasion from outer space, the parousia is the unveiling of a reality that is already quantumly entangled with our spacetime. Christian hope shifts from a future countdown to a daily alignment with this ever-present reality. This theological reframing offers a consistent explanation for how the physical can become the universal. When Paul first spoke of the resurrection to Greek philosophers at Areopagus, they mocked him because they assumed he meant the biological reanimation of corpses. By aligning the text's multi-dimensional vision with the mechanics of physics, the resurrection moves beyond a biological impossibility. It becomes a consistent reality that grounds the faith in the very structure of the universe.